I'm Ingrid Centurion, and this is Centurion's Arena. Just like the ancient Romans who battled in the sandpit using swords, spears, and all types of weapons to entertain the people, in my arena, we're going to battle it out with facts, perspectives, and real-world stories. Let the people decide. Get ready for an amazing and entertaining show. This is Ingrid Centurion, and this is Centurion's Arena. Today I have Eric Hall and Ted Tripp with us, and we're going to talk about the poverty pimp, what that means, and what people out there who are in poverty, what they need to do to get out of poverty. Thanks for being on the show with us today.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you. Thank you.
Eric, you gave me this term, and you're doing amazing things in the community, helping people get out of poverty. You grew up in the inner city. Tell me a little bit about how much this really means to you and what you're seeing out there.
The work is amazing. I love doing the work, and a lot of it came from just my own personal experiences growing up, my own personal experiences as a young child, as a teenager, becoming a young man, becoming a husband and father, and just watching the conditions of poverty sometimes never change. Even with all the money flowing into, whether it's the state, the city, the country, just seeing certain people's conditions never change. And I'm like, okay, you hear about the job market, you hear about unemployment rates and all these different housing markets. And when you see a certain body of individuals never move, even when all these other factors are changing, you got to question why.
Exactly.
And as a young person, I began to say, why is it this way? Why does people's condition stay this way? And I began to realize there's a lot of factors that go into it. The first thing I did was begin to learn on my own. What does real estate mean? What does it mean to be a business owner? And so I tried those things, and I realized it was a whole different world from just working for someone. And it also can put you in a different tax bracket. It can also, allow you to have more, but you can also lose more. And so as I began to do things on my own, I'm like, wow, I learned these things not from the school system. I learned them because I decided to pick up some books from an article I saw, from an interview, and I began to see that it was a whole different world. And when I got on the track to begin trying to build wealth, I began to see that it was a different mindset. It was a different way of thinking, a different, just a lot of things that were different. Everything from religious beliefs to political stances to how we treated money. And I began to realize I have to build something, go back and teach this, because the masses is not getting this information.
Right, but I grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, and I worked hard my whole life.
Absolutely.
And I saved my money. And so, and I have family members that are on welfare in New York City.
Absolutely.
And they're exactly the same story, okay? They're still living, in the building. Absolutely. And why are they not able to move up, move out,
Absolutely.
and buy a home and actually get out of poverty?
Absolutely.
And so, Ted, you've been in Massachusetts a really long time, and you see things that are happening. I really want to talk about this on how, what are we doing and what should we be doing to help people get out of poverty rather than keeping them in poverty.
Absolutely.
And there's some organizations out there, that's who we're calling the poverty pimps.
When we first talked about that, I'm still laughing at our first conversation. And for lack of a better word, when I first heard that, I said it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, but go ahead, continue.
Right, so Ted, I introduced you to this term.
Right. I sort of heard it before, but I think it's well worth talking about, poverty pimps. And you mentioned working hard when you were growing up, but to work hard, you also need a job. And I think it's important for people at the poverty level to have access to jobs.
Absolutely.
So you want a low unemployment. You want a lot of jobs, people to have choices. I think another thing that's important, and a lot of economists would agree, is to have people at the poverty level to have good access to education. These people need education. Even if you have a job, you want to have a better job at some point, and then a better job after that. In a lot of those cases, that depends on your education to move up the ladder to better and better jobs, more and more income. And one of the problems we have in this state is the education in the inner cities isn't as good as it should be.
And Eric, you grew up in the inner city.
Absolutely,
Right?
absolutely.
And do you agree with that statement?
No, I totally agree. It wasn't until, and I don't know if you guys know about the MECO system, which is kids being bused to suburban communities to get an education, and the waiting list was so long, and I'm like, okay, I understand this, but I don't understand it. Why isn't the quality of education good enough where parents are okay leaving their kids in a school that's around the corner or up the block or maybe a bus ride away, 10, 15 minutes away, but the kids had to go hours away. And I got a chance to be on both sides because my son went to MECO, but it was closer. It was Brookline. And I said, it stinks to me that he had to go to Brookline to get the type of education that's going to be college ready, college worthy. And so, again, and the school system has a lot of different flaws, but I just think it stinks that the quality is not as high in the inner city as it is in suburban communities, or not so suburban, but just outside of the inner city. It's not the same level of education. I mean, my son went to a school where they had 4 different buildings. And in the city, some of the schools, they're making copies of the textbook because they don't even have textbooks. So, then access to computers and technology, the inner city, it seemed like gets the crumbs
And
as far as education, absolutely.
And what I want to understand is in a state that is wealthy like Massachusetts, where we have the best education in the world, of course, at the adult learning level, but why is it the inner city schools should be the best schools in Massachusetts? We should be busing kids from out in the suburbs to the city. Can you explain that to me, or what is going on here?
Well, I don't think busing is a solution.
That's true. That's
Okay.
true.
Back in the 70s when it was tried, I'm not sure it had a lot of effect. I mean, the inner city schools still have major problems with education. My own feeling is the problem is there's not enough free market for education. I mean, we need more charter schools. I mean, they're not all going to succeed. Some will fail. But right now, the government says there's a cap on charter. We need more people to try alternative schools, charter schools. If people want to homeschool, let's make it easier. Let's try a lot of different things. And whatever works in the inner cities, let's promote that. Let's help them to whatever works. I'm not sure throwing money at it is going to help. It hasn't helped elsewhere in other parts of the country, but some innovative things would be more useful. And unfortunately,
I'll give you an example of what you're saying and why it matters. We were a part of, my son went to it's a charter, considered charter/pilot school. And they put a lot of money into the school. The first 8 years, they had 6 different principals. And the school people was pulling their kids out of the school left and right. They did bring in a principal, and I'm going to mention this. They brought in a principal, and they began putting resources behind this principal. Now, unfortunately, it was the first white principal they brought in. They put financial resources behind that principal, brought back the arts program, a strong sports program. The school began to thrive and now has a waiting list because people want to get into that school. Because the school began to do so well when resources that affected morale, that affected participation, that really spoke to educating the young people and not seeing them as a deficit, but as an asset and a resource that's going to be the changes of the future, the leaders of the future. When the school began to do that, you saw a whole shift. My son was the first graduating class that entered the building when the school opened. By the time he graduated and went off to high school, people were waiting and knocking on the door to get people into school. But prior, in the 5th grade, when he was in the 5th grade, 4th grade, people were pulling their kids out because so many changes were happening. School morale was low. The numbers were low for testing. They're one of the top testing schools in the state now. So the resources can help, but I thought it wasn't right that they only put those resources once a white principal entered the building. When there was a Hispanic, black principal, they never put those resources behind them. So we gotta look at all the elements of when resources does and does not work. And I had nothing but great feelings towards the principal. I think he did some great things. But I can fix a house up better if I had money to pay for my woodwork, my bathroom, and my plumbing over someone who doesn't have anything to fix the same bathroom. So we got to look at all those elements. But it does boil down to the access really educating and making an educational foundation in the school strong, whether it's through charter. Because I was initially against charter schools, I was against the extended day, but I realized like, wow, these kids are learning robotics, they're learning business, they're learning different things in the extended day that help them with school morale and better grades during the regular part of the day. But it was non-traditional, and it broke the rules of, English and math and science, and really began to speak to the children's needs and desires. And so I had to look at my own belief, like, wow, the extended day is not so bad, the charter school is not so bad, but at the sake of and at the sacrifice of public schools, it's one of those funny fights, it's one of those funny fights,
Now, what about private schools where if you're low income, you can't afford to send your kids to private school because now you have to save more money. Well, I mean, I guess you can save that money because you value education.
But there's a place for private schools. If the people who are better off economically can send their kids to private schools, that money then is freed up for the public schools. So that makes more money available to the public schools because those kids are now not in the public schools. So I don't see where that's a negative. Again,
and I agree. I don't think the private school is a bad thing if you can
got
afford
private
it.
schools, you got charter schools, you got public schools, you got homeschooling, and I think they can experiment more on some of the charter schools can be oriented towards more hands-on, industrial type, maybe training on some of the plumbing, carpentry, whatever, maybe computer aided design, things that the local businesses or manufacturing would want. So I think we need more of this to train the kids to be productive citizens in the future.
But we've had a conversation about this where, tradesmen, now you can't find that many plumbers around, right? There's not as many electricians, but really, I want to know why are we not teaching math and advanced math, the jobs like the engineerings and stuff like that in the inner cities? What's going on in the inner cities when it comes to that? Because I just had 2 other guests on the show, and they were talking about how, advanced math at a very young age is a good thing. That's how you're going to build the skill sets in the inner cities. If you want,
I think that's part of it. I do think that's part of it, but I think it's partly to. It's tied partly to interest as well.
Okay.
And I don't think teaching them advanced, if there's nothing to connect. So say you have, like they got a lot of STEM programs now, but they're doing technology and different things. I think when you got kids who are interested in that advanced math may be, but their interest and the kids' interest may not be in an area that needs advanced math. They may be an artist who wants to be an artist. And so I think everyone puts emphasis on what the higher paying careers are. And I truly believe, and I teach it in my book, that you can make money in everything from trash to computers. And I don't think there's enough emphasis on kids' interest as they get the basic stuff they need, math, English. But I think if schools put interest on, that's why I think schools with good arts program and good programs around sports and good programs, you need the math and all that stuff as well. All of it's needed.
Right. To me, we're going to talk about this too, one of the most important things is finances.
It's finances, right.
It's saving money, not overspending. And that's
they don't
why
teach
I say
it, and they don't teach that in school.
Adding and subtracting is pretty easy.
Right,
if you
of
can
course.
add and subtract, then you make money, you save money.
Right.
You save money and you don't live above your means, and you save money so, to buy a house one day in the future. And this goes back to the poverty pimp. And I do want to talk about your book here, The Diamond Project, and how you're teaching. And tell us a little bit more about, this mindset of getting out of the inner city and actually buying a home.
And I think what I would just for correction, it's not necessarily about getting out of the inner city, because I think you can have a quality of life wherever you live. Right. There's parts of Roxbury that people are flooding back to Roxbury from all races, black, white, Asian. Boston is a very rich city. So when you say, I know like housing developments and housing projects, no one's moving back in to move into a development if they're coming in more than likely buying homes. there's beautiful homes all across Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester. There's beautiful homes. I own a $500,000 house on Dorchester on Blue Hill Ave and on Seaver Street. There's properties all up and down. I mean, there's judges that live in Roxbury. There's vice presidents of companies. There's real estate CEOs that live in Boston. So I think it's more or less about the conditions in which we live. And so to break the cycle and really begin to, one of the things I try to show people is that what do you have? What is it in you? And I do it with adults and also with children, and I promote education. I promote education, math, reading, science. You need education because you can't go to no level of productivity in your life without education. When I begin to work with adults who may have been second, third generation on welfare, second, third generation on food stamps, it's a tough cycle to break, but it also boils down to you got to be willing to work for it, though. You have to be willing to work. And that conditioning makes people sometimes get lazy. And it makes it, if one generation says, okay, well, this is how we made our living, and never pointed to being an entrepreneur, never pointed out being someone who invented or created something, using math for, like my son is excellent in math. So even the stuff I struggle with, my daughter's like, Dad, she's in the 9th grade now, and they changed up how they do the math. And he got to talk to your big brother, because he was excellent in math. But I told him because of that, you can go so many different directions. So what I try to show people is that you have gifts and talents within you that can be a business, that can be something that can create economics for you and your family. Because no one ever talks about entrepreneurship as a career path or starting a business as a way to generate revenue. And me, myself, personally, I've made more money as an entrepreneur than any job was willing to pay me because of the level of schooling that I had. So the schooling piece is one part of it. Education is one piece. But I think we forget that education is so much broader than school, so much more than school. You can go to your local library and learn things that a school won't give you. I've done several conferences and taught financial empowerment to young people, and they're like, why don't they teach us this in school? Why do I get credit card slips before I even take my first class? Because part of the poverty pimping is to get you in debt, and you have so much debt that you can't get out of it. And if you never learn finances and you struggle with math, you're really going to be jammed up. So it all goes back to education. You know, from education you get in school. So, you know, for me, I believe that every individual has the potential to do something great and to be great. But sometimes because someone is in poverty and they're in debt, they can't get out of it. People are just working to pay the bills or working to pay off debt or working to pay off credit card. You know, people don't go and say, can I afford it? It's just like, how much is the note? And so sometimes that's a conditioning of, well, I'll pay exactly what I can afford, even if that car is too expensive for me, as opposed to getting a lowest costing car and putting the remainder in the bank. So sometimes saving is not a priority.
And what I meant about, you know, growing up in the inner city is when you grow up in a big city, the homes in a city are very expensive.
Absolutely.
So the likeliness of someone growing up in the inner city or in affordable housing, you know, what is the likeliness of them saving enough money and to be able to buy a home in the city?
Right, and that's hard.
That's right.
It's almost impossible.
Right. So, but this is the mindset that we have to change.
Of course.
Just because you grow up in the city, you want to stay in the city, right? But you have to save enough money, you know, to buy the multi-million-dollar home, and that's a long time. It's going to be a long time to save, you know, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 as a down payment. Yep. So you got to.
Well, now the new phenomenon is you got people making $60,000, $70,000 who can't live in the city of Boston or New York because it's too expensive. Yeah. People making $70,000 and can't live in the city. They have to move out somewhere where it's a little less expensive. And so, you know, again, it's one of those conversations where, you know, where the goal is to help people become the best they can become. And if lack of income or finances is keeping you back, then you got to find a way. And I show people how to take their talent to make more income. It's not always a second and third job that opens up your finances or allows you to make more money. Sometimes it's tapping into an idea that someone else needs, and that can become something that can then feed your family, you know?
So you're both authors and writers here, journalists for the Boston Broadside, the People's paper here I have in front of me. And you're the author of The Diamond Project, Find and Develop Your Hidden Treasures. You're educating and informing the public. Share with us some other ideas and your thoughts on the Poverty Pimp.
Well, I've been writing a series for the last 4 or 5 months now that I picked up on amendments to the state budget. And this is a process that comes up every year, and it's really out of control. We have a budget of about $42, $43 billion in the state, and it's exacerbated by an amendment process. The House, for example, on a regular basis, usually puts out about 1,200 amendments, and the Senate does the same thing. And most of these amendments add money to the budget, anywhere from $25,000 to could be $10 or $12 million. And a lot of these are for pet projects, but some of them are doing exactly what we're talking about. I brought some examples here that this is a long-running project I'm doing. I'm on the fifth or sixth section of it now. And let me just give you some examples now. Malden High School for the Star Wellness Center, $100,000. And now there's a lot of money in the budget for health. As a matter of fact, 42% of the budget goes for medical spending. And this is just an amendment. Wraparound services for social workers in the Malden Public School, $75,000. Springfield Neighborhood Housing Services, $100,000. And you find a lot of this that are just added to the budget. And you're saying every town could do the same thing, but they do it, they earmark this, and it's just mainly to curry favor with the voters in the town. Right. And they have their little pet projects. And I don't think it does a lot of actual good. I think people are just, these organizations, they depend on the state money to exist from year to year.
Absolutely.
And I don't think they're solving any problems.
Absolutely.
I do 40 of those.
Wow.
Every month.
And that's good information to have and at that level.
You know, there's a Massachusetts Partnership for Youth in Saugus, $300,000.
How much makes it to the youth?
Dedham Food Pantry, $50,000. Every town has a food pantry. You know, we do in North Andover where I live. Right. But we don't ask for state money, you know, right. So, you know, and I think most towns don't ask for state money. So there's a lot of money that I think is spent on things that aren't solving any problems.
Right. Right,
and that's what we call, you know.
And that's where the term comes from. Because if you think about it, like I was sharing with Ingrid, just being a part of the work and being a part of being on the problem side and now being on the solution side, because I believe in finding solutions. Let's look for the solutions. We know what issues out there. So I sit on a few boards and I do some things in the city where, you know, you see large amounts of money go to organizations simply because they're a large organization and they can manage large amounts of money. And I think it started some years ago where organizations became fiscal conduits for, say, small organizations that didn't have maybe their nonprofit status. So as a fiscal conduit, the money will run through your organization and then you give the money to the organization. But then you got fiscal conduits who became the fiscal conduit for this large amount of money, say 1 million, and they're going to give 10,000 to or 50,000 to smaller agencies. But you got this fiscal conduit who does nothing but just give people the money, and they're taking a large chunk for themselves, and then decide who they want to give the other chunks to, and decide who the partners are. And to me, very little makes it down to the end user. When you say $300,000 for youth, it's like how much gets spent on the youth. Yeah. I remember grading a grant. I graded a grant one time, and it was small. It was a small grant. It was only about $75,000. And so everybody that submitted for this proposal, it was an RFP. When I see the amount of money that was going to the problem, it just hurt my soul. Like, all the money's going to salaries. Like, if it's $75,000 and $50,000 is going to, or $60,000 is going to salaries, and then this is going to ambiance and the way the place looks, you're going to tell me this $2,000 is going to help some young people? Yeah. But $75,000 was in my soul. things like that I've seen, sometimes from the outside looking in, sometimes being at the table. It's why I said no to a lot of board seats and why I didn't want to be a part of certain committees. I'm not going to sit around and there's money being allocated for us to talk about the issues when the issue's still happening and the money's going to talk about it rather than putting it towards it. To me, that's the best level of poverty pimping, when the money never makes it to the end user or the one that's supposed to benefit from it, but agencies can siphon off their pieces based on who their buddies are, whether it's with the federal government or wherever. And so when I look at that, and this is another reason I began to teach self-sufficiency and economic, and how to break the cycle of poverty, how to create and try to build wealth, because it's a whole different mindset. And I said, I'll leave this planet teaching this and educating folks on how to not be dependent on a system or the government. But how do you be a benefit to the system? Whether it's because now you're educated in finances and you can now make a difference. So again, I think it's a big challenge and it's a big task. But I think with folks like yourself and the work, I think it's going to take a little bit from all of us to really help break the mindset, but then to find a way to challenge those agencies.
That's right.
And to call them agencies out.
Let me give you a few more statistics here. The Daily Caller News Foundation did an in-depth study in 2017 and on what they call poverty pimps. The National Urban League is one they mentioned. Their president made $870,000 a year. This was back in 2017, 2016. Another one they mentioned was Operation Hope. Their chairman made $542,000 back then in 2015. And Neighbor Works America. And a lot of these are getting huge percentages of government money, federal money and state money. Neighbor Works America. The National Council on Aging gets 79% of its total revenue from government. The National Council of La Raza was another one. And they go on and mention a number of organizations taking large amounts of government money, and their executives are getting very, very high salary. I assume you're not in that category.
No, I'm not an executive of no organization. I'm familiar with the first three. I'm familiar with them, and I've heard of the first three, not the second three. But I'm not an executive of any company. My goal is to see funds allocated back to the people, because if we're saying we're changing lives and we have these kind of salaries, like, well, what money is going back to the to the community? And that's really the big challenge, is what are we giving back to the community? What's going back to the community?
And this is such a big topic. We are going to break for this session of the Poverty Ping, and I'm going to have you back on the show. We're going to continue this conversation.